How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the Soulward. My name is Bryce Newberger, and today I wanted to have an open letter to the church and just talk about my experience with church, what it's meant to me growing up, and my current problems with the church, and why you will not see me in a church building very often these days, which I think is an interesting perspective for me to give as someone who absolutely loves and has loved church for most of my life. So when I was growing up, church was big to my family. I grew up in Florida, I was born in Florida. And in Florida, I have all these memories of my family being extremely charismatic and Pentecostal leaning, though I don't think we thought of ourselves that way. I think we just said we're non-denom, but looking back and knowing now a lot, I'm like, oh, we were Pentecostal leaning. Word of Faith movement, we were revival era Christians into our DNA. And my grandmother having, very long prayer meetings, wanting to pray over us every time she saw us for an uncomfortably long period of time. My family watching this gospel performer named Carmen, who had these amazing stage plays and videos that he put out for kids content, and singing songs like Satan Bite the Dust and Witch's Invitation, all this stuff as a kid that I just loved and drank in. And watching Bible Man with his, legally distinct lightsaber sword of the spirit. And church was everything to me as a kid. I loved church. I loved God. And to me, church and God was not just a building. It was something we did as a family. We listened to Newsboys and DC Talk, and my brothers and I was the youngest of three brothers. My brothers and I, we danced to Audio Adrenaline and, like I said, DC Talk and Newsboys. Growing up as I got older into a teenager, or even preteen, listening to bands like Reliant K and Fillmore and Skillet. And then there was even, these movements where sometimes Christian artists were considered too edgy and, off limits amongst the Christian artists to listen to. I think one was a Christian rapper. I think his name was T-Bone, but he sang about being a demon killer or something. And I think he was one that were like, you gotta be careful with him. He's an edgy Christian singer. And when we moved to Oklahoma, amid the early to mid 90s, there was a lot of school shootings with the Columbine scare and many other school shootings that had happened. And my family moved from Florida to Oklahoma to get into the Bible Belt. And it's funny because Carmen, that gospel singer performer, had this two-part movie series called Riot, and it was about a similar thing. This police officer named Rizzo moves his family to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we were just following in his footsteps. And so, yeah, because that's where we went, Tulsa, Oklahoma, near Guts Church, and we did the church shopping thing, but not very long. We ended up finding this mega church called Church on the Move, and the lead pastor was primarily known as being a children's pastor who stepped into the role of senior pastor through starting his own church, and he ran the Gospel Bill show, and everything was geared towards children and fun. They had a whole puppet ministry. I think they still have a whole puppet ministry, and it was fantastic. We then also, my family made the very expensive sacrifice, my parents, to enroll me and my middle brother into the Christian private school there, Lincoln Christian School, where I had chapel every Wednesday. I had a Bible class every morning. And we grew up in this church. My dad would go on to become the soccer coach for their soccer team. My dad is a fantastic soccer player, went pro for like 2 seconds as a goalie. And it was just a great environment for our family. Every Sunday we wanted to go. Now, my family, like all families, we had our own fights and strifes and discord, right? Human beings are really good at wounding one another. And so sometimes the chaos that you would find in a typical home felt like a lot for me. And so I loved being at church. I loved being at my Christian school. And I truly believed that everything I was taught was true. I thought that if need be, I could walk on water. If God called me to and I had the faith, I could do it. That if someone had broken into my house, that I could rebuke the attackers in the name of Jesus, and no weapon formed against me shall prosper. And so young Bryce's faith was infinite, right? And so I think maybe the epitome of what Jesus talked about, of having the faith of a child, because I just truly believed, fish and loaves could multiply and water could turn to wine today, right? That miracles happen all around us. And then there'd be days where I was too sick to go to church, and I tell my parents, well, you should take me to church anyways, because that's where sick people should go, to church, to God, right? My thought was, they'll heal me. And as a teenager, the only time I ran away from home that my parents know about was when they banned me from church because I was acting out as a teenager. So I climbed out, I locked my door, climbed out my 2-story window, and started walking towards where I thought church was. And I did not go in the right direction. I got completely lost. And at 15 years old, I truly, consciously gave my life to Christ. I was already baptized, already going to church, but really my decision to follow God truly woke up and became my own at about 15 years old, where I said, okay, I'm going to die to myself and I'm going to live for God. And then I really wanted to be a pastor, because the pastors in my life were my superheroes. They cared about me. They loved me. Now, I went to a mega church, so I didn't actually see the pastor very much at church, especially not the senior pastor. But my Bible teachers were also pastors at the church, and I would stay after class and ask them long questions, and I would write things down, and I would listen well, and I'd keep my Bible with me. And then in my middle school years, I began to volunteer at my local church in the various ministries. And so I got to show up early on Sunday and sit down with some really cool pastors, and got kind of one-on-one as we had a morning devotional, and we talked about the ministry, and we relied on one another. And I just thought, if you want to make the world a better place, you want to be a pastor. If you want to be a real life superhero, growing up, I loved comic books like Spider-Man and all that. And I thought, man, if you really want to be Spider-Man, you want to be a pastor. Because sure, we have amazing heroes in our military and firefighters and police department, public servants, and, all these amazing jobs that people do out there, even teachers, especially teachers who do not get paid enough for the work that they do and invest in children. But I just thought, I want to heal spiritual wounds. I want to find the pain that people have that no medicine can touch. And I want to bring faith and healing and resurrection into people's lives the way God had brought faith and healing and resurrection into my own life. And so that was my dream. I would grow up, I would become a pastor, and I would change the world, one life to 1,000,000 lives at a time, right? And so as I got into high school and then my junior, senior year, I would take my friends out to coffee when their parents were going through a divorce. I'd show up and we'd go out to Starbucks. We'd talk about God. We'd sit in random, playgrounds and just sit on the swings and talk, just through life. And I'd always encourage people with a proverb. And I didn't know it at the time, but that is actually a lot of what the main job of being a pastor is it's bearing with people through pastoral counseling. It's not so much the throwing dodgeballs and preaching a sermon and running youth camps, so that takes up a lot of the job. But the real heart of ministry is to feed the lost lambs, is to restore the broken souls. And that's what I was passionate about, even from my time as a teenager. So I graduated. And as I graduated, I thought, okay, I'm going to go to a Oral Roberts University, and I'm going to that's in Oklahoma. It's in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I'm gonna go there. I'm gonna graduate, and I'm gonna become a pastor. But I had a long distance relationship with this girl I had met at church, and I decided I wanted to marry her. She was at my church for like a weekend. I didn't know she had lived in Arizona. So we dated for 2 years. I found out quick that she was in Arizona, but we decided to make it work. We dated for 2 years. I liked her walk with God. I felt she took God seriously. All the other girls that I kind of knew in my life, either one, I wasn't just attracted to them, or two, the ones that I found really attractive didn't really have a serious faith, and that was really important to me. And this girl really seemed to take her faith seriously. So I decided I would date her, I would marry her, but her father said, you have to come out to Arizona first if you want to marry my daughter. Okay, so I graduated, took my car, my computer, my parents drove me out, and they dropped me off in Arizona. I rented a room, I got whatever job I could, and I really couldn't afford college. I started going to a community college while working at call center. Well, first I worked at a Sears selling vacuums and mattresses, but eventually I would find my way into seminary. And I would continue to work my corporate jobs, and I would work through call centers, up through tech jobs, into management, into project management, into being a director of customer service. And all the time I thought, man, I really want to be a pastor at a church. And I was going to seminary, and I was being an intern at a church. And here's what started to shift. I felt like my corporate time, I was just wasting my life outside of ministry, that my life was meant for ministry. And all these years, as I became 20, 25, 26, 27, 28, I thought, man, all this time wasted in my life, I want to be a pastor. Now, I didn't know that a lot of the work I did as a manager over employees was being a pastor to them. In fact, to this day, the best pastor I ever worked for was at this cloud computing company where the CEO was a Christian, and he wasn't a pastor at all. But that man really pastored me as I went through heartbreak. My wife and I had lost a few babies. We had some struggles in our marriages from the grief and the death, and the grief that came from those miscarriages. And he handed me all the money in his wallet, said, take my wife out on a date. He offered me his cabin. He was just truly an amazing heart of a pastor, but he was a CEO. And I didn't realize at the time the difference between having a pastor's heart and having a pastor's job. And those are two different things. And when I was a little boy, I would carry my Bible with me. By little boy, I mean teenager and young adult. But I would carry my Bible with me. I would just go to church. I'd serve. But when I became an intern, quickly, I began to get cuffed on the ear time and time again. I would talk about my views on Halloween, which were extreme coming from a Pentecostal family. Well, I don't celebrate Halloween. My family stays home when we watch Christian movies. And again, I got cuffed on the ear. I was like, hey, we're throwing a Halloween event. You can't say those things. I get it now. Sorry. I apologize. I recant. And then, hey, this kid was banned from going to church by his mom. And so I called his mom up and said, hey, we're doing a Bible study. It'd be really cool if he could come. And it was like, no, you can't do that because his mom is parenting him and you tried to overstep her authority. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. And it's not that these were unreasonable requests. I think those are really good points and lessons I had to learn. But the difference is where I used to just kind of dance with Jesus, I used to just kind of walk freely with Jesus. My faith and my expression of my faith was deeply personal and it came easy. It was like breathing. I just kind of walked with God and I did whatever I felt was on my heart was right to do with God. As an intern at a church with a youth pastor over me, my hand was continually slapped as I learned time and time again, this is the wrong thing to do. This is the wrong thing to say. This is the wrong thing to believe or wear or think or do. All right. And then my family expectation, there was this unmet expectation of where's your wife? Where's your kids? Right. Let's make sure they're coming to church. And she started to serve with me in the youth group. And there was expectations on her. She'd make the wrong post on social media. She'd tell the wrong joke to the wrong person. And all of a sudden, this free and easy dance and walk with Christ felt like I lived in a faith made of glass. And every single time, if I wasn't careful, I would touch the wrong thing and it would break and it would shatter. And there would be these Christians who were like, oh, you broke this thing. Why did you break this thing? Right? You should have known better. You were foolish. And I felt foolish and I felt shamed and I felt wrong. And I just thought, oh man, being a Christian is really hard. Becoming a pastor, and the Bible says, let not many of you become pastors. So I get it. But the freedom in Christ didn't really exist. The all things are lawful, but not all things are profitable is a verse that I think we took an eraser to. There was a lot of don'ts and there was a lot of do's and there was a big checklist. And then as I served that church, then I began to apply for pastor jobs. I was 28 and I began to become a pastor after about 8 years interning from like 21 to 28. I interned at this church, just not thinking I was ready and hoping a position would open up for me at my local church. Eventually they're like, Bryce, there's never going to be a job here for you, right? We love you, but the youth pastor's never going to retire. Please go find church work. And my CEO said the same thing. Bryce, I know you want to be a pastor. If you want to stay with me, I want to have you, but the business has grown by $5 million. I would need to restructure around people I can count on. Are you here or are you a pastor? And he said, I think you're a pastor. So he gave me like 3 months severance and said, go find your pastor job. So I stepped out and I became a pastor full time. And when applying for churches, I had applied for many business jobs and corporate jobs. I'd never applied for church jobs. And I was shocked at how they were the exact same process for the most part. Yes, you'd have to fill out this religious summary, right? Sometimes there was a Bible questionnaire. But for the most part, it was a largely secular process. But it was a little bit more frustrated because there'd also be sometimes committees. And if one person on the committee just thought you were too prideful or thought you were too young or too foolish, it was very difficult to get a pastor job. And they interview you for months. They will interview you from anywhere from 3 to 8 months for a pastor job. So when I was given 3 months severance, that sounds like a good amount of time to find a job, but not for a church job. They can drag their heels for a very long time. And I know really good pastors that I really love and trust, and they literally didn't put a lot of prayer into it. They took the first church job that stopped dragging their heels because they said, at least this shows an organization can make a decision. And when I became a pastor, I thought it was all about the preaching and the games and the innovation and the branding, and my heart went to the wrong things. That servant pastor's heart that I had as a kid, as a young adult, to take people out and talk about coffee was replaced with the branding and the safety mindset and all of the communication skills and so my first church was like, hey, we want to see you having coffee with kids. I'm like, sure, like I'll get around to it, but like their youth group wasn't doing good. So they hired me to come in and kind of rebrand. And all the questions were always the same: growth, 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 growth. How can you open our front door and close our back door? How can you get people into the church and stop them from leaving? Right. And that was always the mindset. So, do you have a catchy brand? Do you have a vision? What exciting games are you going to run? Right. How many dodgeballs are you going to throw? Are your sermons communicated clearly and bombastically? And can you inspire passion? And can you recruit volunteers and build the team? And it's a lot of work to be a youth pastor. A youth pastor does everything that a senior pastor does without the staff. Senior pastor has an executive pastor. They've got a worship pastor. They've got an events coordinator or director, sometimes pastor, right? They got a counseling pastor. Youth pastor, he does the counseling, the events, all of it. And sometimes at churches, the youth ministry is more vibrant than the adult ministry. It's all on the shoulders of one man and his volunteer team. So it took a lot of pressure, took a lot of time, and you could really work yourself to death as being a youth pastor. That's why youth pastors burn out all the time. And I really lost sight of, like I said, that servant's heart. I was a pastor for 3 years out in Las Vegas. That's where they ended up hiring me. And during that time, COVID hit. The pandemic shut us down. The George Floyd riots started in that area. It got pretty bad with the looting because as a youth pastor, you don't make a lot of money. So I bought a home in a part of town that a lot of cop friends at the church were like, you bought a house where? And so when I moved in, someone had been murdered down the street, and they were during the riot time. People were busting down doors and looting houses in the area. And so I took my family to Arizona to stay with their parents, and then I was slapped on the wrist. Hey, you're being, and my senior pastor, who lived in a gated community in a much better part of town where you need a code to get in, yelled at me and contemplated firing me and asked me to quit because he said I was too afraid of the pandemic. I was showing fear, and I was like, listen, and I needed to ask his permission to bring my family to. I needed his permission to bring my family to Arizona because I thought it was unsafe for them in Las Vegas. And I said, listen, you're my boss. You're not the boss of my family. You can be the head of me, but not the head of my household. So I'm going to do what I think is right for my family, but I will be back in Vegas in the morning, ready to report, ready for duty, right? But I'm going to put my family where I think they're safe. And that was a no-no. Then my brother-in-law died. of COVID. And as my brother-in-law died, my wife's mental health really shattered with grief and all the expectations of being in a church. And we had just recently had a baby, and she had, for the first time ever, we had our third son, but she had postpartum anxiety and depression. And when she began to talk about her struggles with anxiety and depression in the church, we got told by the senior leadership, hey, you got to be careful of who she talks to about mental health. Like, this is something that, we don't want people to think the wrong things. So she needs to be more careful, more guarded, right? And so the pressure put on our family, primarily put on my wife. I had a lot of pressure on my job, but it also put a lot of pressure on my wife to keep performing and act right and do right and be right. And it's no shame to her, but she cracked. She couldn't take it. And especially with the death of her brother, especially with the postpartum anxiety and depression, especially with everything going on. So as she began to lose her faith and lose her mind and everything to fall apart in her life, I talked to the senior pastor and said, I think I should step down from ministry and focus on my family. He said, no. We hired you, not her. She's fine, though there's a wrong way to grieve and a right way to grieve. And we think she's grieving the wrong way. But we want you to stay in ministry. Not only that, we want to make sure we're getting a good 40 hours out of you a week. So we want to make sure, here's a list of to-dos, and it was the summertime. And so we want you to run one event every week of the summer for the best summer ever while you're grieving, while your wife is suffering. Well, she had actually just cheated on me. And I told that to the senior pastor with that, like, hey, this is going on. She's trying to leave me for an online boyfriend. I think I should step down from ministry. And they said, no, we hired you, not her. So I didn't have the wisdom. I made too much of the ministry, and I thought, okay, like, I trust the senior pastor. He's the shepherd. He loves me. He loves God. He loves the ministry. I'm going to stay on the horse because he wants me to stay on the horse. Now, I didn't know that this specific senior pastor had a history, a legacy, a track record of basically hiring people, wringing out everything he could get out of them, and then firing them and hiring someone new. And the youth pastor that I had been called to replace, he had done the same summer thing too. He had him run one event every weekend in the summer, and the guy says, I can't take anymore. He's like, hey, let's get you out of here. Let's get Bryce in here. And so he just used me and left me. And at the end of it, basically I pinched my nerve. As I pinched nerve, I went on a steroid. The steroid had an interaction with all the emotional trauma I was going. It induced psychosis. I asked for some, I called my doctor. It caused, trigger warning here, we're going to talk about some, a little time to stop if you want to, but we're going to talk about suicidal thoughts in a second. Not in depth, but we're going to say the word, so that was a trigger warning. But it's triggered suicidal thoughts in me. I had a close run-in with a suicidal thought, suicidal attempt, and I called my doctor, right, got myself handled, and then I checked myself into a facility because I couldn't get the prescription filled that my doctor said I needed ASAP. And from that facility, I called my senior pastor boss, and he fired me over the phone and said, there's no place for you here. You're not welcome in church anymore. You're excommunicated. And that was it. No severance. And he said, I owe you one more check, but beyond that, that's it. And I sat there in that mental institution with a wife who was cheating on me and leaving me, with a pinched nerve in my back, undergoing psychosis from the steroid I was having and waiting for some medication to kick in. And I was on this mandatory 72-hour hold in this place that was, there's supposed to be a section for people who aren't so bad and a section for people who are legitimately insane, and they didn't have enough staff, so they put us all together. And so I was in this place where there was physical violence happening to certain people. It was better to keep your head down. People were screaming that they were demon possessed or that they were God. There was other things going on in there that I won't even talk about because they're quite crass and inappropriate, but it was not a nice place. And I asked for a Bible. I got one. It was all scribbled, had pages torn out. And when I got out of that place, my wife left me. I was fired with no job, and I had nowhere to go. And I just thought, I love God. I love church. Let me be there. Right. And so as my wife left, I just went to church every time it was open. So I started going to different churches, went to Bible studies, one on Wednesday, one on Saturday, one on Sunday night. I went to church once on Saturday, twice on Sunday, and I just tried to be in church as much as possible. I ended up selling my Vegas home and taking some of that money, splitting it with my, ex-wife, soon to be ex-wife. And then I traveled. I went to Oklahoma, and I went back between Oklahoma, Las Vegas, and Arizona. Between all these places, I just went to a lot of different churches, saw a lot of different expressions of faith, went to Pentecostal churches, went to Reformed churches, right? Went to Presbyterian churches, went to all these different churches, all these different expressions of faith, all these different Bible studies, and just embraced the body of God and kind of struggled with what is church, what is humanity. Since then, that was 6 years ago, I've gone on to become a mental health professional. I was hired by one of my therapists to become a pastoral counselor, and then I started to get training and certifications and learning a lot. And I'm currently going back to get my Master's of Arts in Counseling so I can be more of a clinical therapist. And that's going to be actually where I'm going to be posting on here a lot of my classes so we can walk through it together and learn together. That's going to be a lot of fun. But since then, I've gotten remarried and to a beautiful, amazing woman. I've had another baby, another beautiful, amazing baby, watching him sleep right now on the baby monitor while I make this video. And I have struggled with the title of divorce because I didn't choose it. I didn't want it. In fact, the woman I married is so amazing, has such a great faith that when she met me, she wanted to make sure before we even started dating that there was no chance of reconciliation with my ex-wife before we even started. And she was currently getting she's done now, but when I was dating her, she was getting her master's in theology. And so what she did was she wrote her final paper on divorce and remarriage as her final effort to say, okay, is it okay if I, marry a divorced man? And, my wife was already on my ex-wife was already on her third boyfriend. I did the whole thing, sending her flowers every anniversary and every Valentine's Day. And she was begging me, please stop, or this is inappropriate, right? I'm never coming back to you. Please move on. And so with all of that being said, I did move on. I did find love again. And just as I've lived this Christian life, I've gone back into church. All right, I'm back. It's church. And when people see my kids, or sometimes they see my one child and not my other three, hey, where's your other kids? Oh, they're with their mom. And again, I'm saying this as someone who's trained in people, who knows people, right? My job is to help people work through thoughts. And I don't think it's just me reading into this. You can see the shift in the uncomfortability. I was in a Bible class where a guy talked about his divorce and he talked about everything. Afterwards, my wife and I approached him and said, hey, we want to thank you for being so open, right? This is something we've struggled with, the blended family term in churches. And then he himself got really awkward. And I think it's because it's more okay in churches if it's like, 10 years ago, my wife left me. 25 years ago, my wife left me, right? Or this thing happened. And you better do it the right way, right? It better have been her leaving you or him leaving you. It can't be, you chose it, right? It's got to be the right criteria. And then when I try to plug my family into a church, okay, like I take my kids to church, I only have them now every other week for my 3 boys. And so when I bring them to church, I go to a church and it's like, oh, well, our youth group only meets on Wednesday. Oh, I don't have my kids on Wednesday because the way the parenting schedule works. I have them every Monday and Tuesday. Their mom has them every Wednesday, Thursday. So I never have them on a Wednesday, so I can't take them to a youth group. How can we make sure that my kids fit in here? So when we talk to a church, how can we make sure my kids fit in here? Well, that's not a conversation pastors are ever willing to have. And I don't know why, but I can't get them to meet with me. They're all way too busy. They're running youth camps. They're buying dodgeballs. They're buying snacks. They're preaching their sermons. They don't have time to solve real problems. And as someone who was once in that lifestyle, who once lived that way, I get it. It is distracting. It is confusing. My wife and I are both seminary nerds. So when we sit down in a sermon, it's very fun for us to kind of sit down and discuss the sermon on a deeper level. But I'm going to be honest, every time I sit down for a sermon at my local churches, and we've been through, because I was a youth pastor for a short time at a Lutheran church, and then I went on to interview at this other church where it was more of a Pentecostal leaning church. And then we went to another church. We've been going to a church that is they have a Reformed leadership, but they're not a Reformed church. I don't think the senior pastor is Reformed, though the previous one was. They're more just non-denom. I think they're more Molinist now, which I really like Molinism. But when we sit down for a sermon, they're not giving you really much. I mean, I find my most challenging theological thoughts in reading books and having discussions and doing studies, right, and debating with, Catholicism, wow, and right, these are where I can really fly in my more philosophical, more theological seminary thought, right, where we can talk about, orthopraxy versus orthodoxy, right, and all these things, right, and you just don't get that at church. So I began to ask the question, well, why do we go to church? And this is my 30-minute video, open letter again, very personal. But when I take my family to church, I want them to receive the Ekklesia. I want them to gather with the brethren. And what we find at churches is you show up, you sit down, and you leave. And it's very difficult to fellowship with people on a Sunday morning. What I do find is I have a men's group that meets every other Thursday. Actually, they meet every Thursday, but I go every other Thursday because parenting schedule, I want time with my wife. It's a whole thing. But that is the most church I get. That's my Ekklesia, but it's only men. I want this for my children. I want this for my wife. So I find that Bible studies outside of Sunday morning are really where you gather, where you study, where you go deeper, where you break bread, where you fellowship. Sunday morning seems to all revolve around sit down so you can hear the pastor's voice. And I think if we're really honest, and I think the best pastors know this, what they have to say on a Sunday is really not that important. Most people don't remember the sermon week after week. They might remember one point that was made sometime in the year that really resounded and stuck with them. But your 5-point sermons, your take-home idea, your big idea, that often doesn't land. And everyone around all the churches I go say the same thing. My pastor's not like the pastor down the street. He tells it like it is. I can't tell you every time I went to a different church in the same area, just down the road from each other, our pastor's different than that pastor because he tells it like it is. He's not afraid, and they're all saying the same milquetoast political ideas, right? The same, when they teach on any given passage, you're honestly not getting anything that you didn't already get in high school from your youth pastor or from your children's ministry. They're not going that deep. You might get a Greek word breakdown here or there. The few times as a youth pastor that I was called to preach to adults, they asked me to dumb down my sermons because they're like, whoa, you're going too deep for people, right? Bring it back, bring it down, make it more lowbrow. And I'm like, but I teach this to middle schoolers. Like, yeah, it's too much for the adults. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if that's just my experience. It's 3 different churches that I've been with that have done that to me in 3 different states. No, in 2 different states. But Sunday morning, I want to take my family to church. I want to fellowship God. I want to worship God, and I want them to grow together with people and peers and believers. And that's often not really on offer Sunday morning. Worship is fantastic, and you feel God more in the worship when you can gather as believers, we raise our hands, and we pour out our hearts to Christ. But the sermons aren't going to challenge you, not often. They're not going to teach you anything new. If you're taking your study seriously Monday through Saturday, if you're really pursuing God, you're really not going to be challenged too much with the sermon. It's going to be I use it more of a time to sit down, listen to the sermon, and then I'll have my Greek and Hebrew out, and I'll do my own Bible study on the side and kind of listen along, but I'm trying to go deeper as he's talking. And then afterwards with my wife, I try to chew on things a little bit more theological, a little bit more heady. More challenging too. Okay, well, let me take a moment to exemplify and go, okay, where have I been rude or where have I been, licentious or open, right? Or where have I been too legalistic, right? But for the most part, it's a lot of self-work, things that I could do at home. And when I ask my kids, what did you learn from church? They'll tell me the Bible story. And I'm like, okay, that was the Bible story that you already knew. What did you learn? And if I'm being honest, my kids are usually like, well, nothing. And so then I'm like, okay, well, let's go deeper as a family, right? Let me challenge you. So I hear pastors often talk why you should go to church, about discipline, about faith. And for someone who has a strong faith, who is disciplined, who loves the gathering of the brethren and has it on offer every Thursday, where we pray for each other. We break bread. We're in a text conversation where we're praying over cancer. We're praying over job loss. We're praying over divorce. We're praying for healing over children. We're providing Christmas gifts for one another. We're providing food. The times that I've been homeless and that I've been down on my luck, they've given me gifts for my kids, and they've given me food, and they've fed me, and they've like housed me. That's not available to me on Sunday. And so when I hear a pastor say, come to church Sunday because you're going to learn about God, that's just not true. I can learn way more about God when you're not on stage with a microphone. Well, come to church because you're going to gather with other believers. That's also not true. My gathering of believers comes from a variety of churches from a geographical area, and we are just kind of lost sheep that found each other because of one faithful man, not me, but one faithful man who kind of put this group together amid his divorce. So on Sunday morning, my family doesn't break bread. On Sunday morning, my family doesn't get challenged in the Word of God. We don't really grow in the knowledge of God. Even when they think they're feeding us meat, it is very milky. And then when I try to have conversations with the pastors, well, hey, I only have my kids every other week, and then they do things like once a month we'll send our kids into the auditorium so they can see Big Church. Well, that's all good and well, but you happen to do that on one of the weeks I have my kids, which means my kid can only go to his own age group Sunday service and meet his own peers once a month. And he can't build friends that way. It's already hard enough for my kids to build friends every other week. Imagine seeing someone once a month at church and trying to build a friend that way. It just doesn't work. My kids get more fellowship at their Christian private school. And so from church, the legacy that I have to church is, dear church, I love you. Dear church, I've believed in you. Dear church, I have begged people not to give up on you. But dear church, you've let me down. Dear church, I am a lamb looking for bread, looking for water, and you don't offer it. I'm looking to dedicate my 8-month-old because we believe in church dedication. But we also take it serious. Dear church, where'd you go? How do we fix you? I don't know.